And so I knew at this time he had held true.
So that must have been pretty devastating for you. You were in high school.
Yes.
And you lived in a household where this was a regular part of your daily life.
Yes.
And so to come home from having a good time and to hear shots ringing out in your home, that must have been very devastating, I would imagine.
Yes, because before I would have heard some fussing or some arguing or that kind of stuff, but it was completely silent. And the only thing that was different, like I said, was that he didn't fuss at her with the thought of her getting dressed to go out. But as a, in living there and living through it, children are like little soldiers. They learn to adapt to their environment, and whatever is going on, they have a plan. They have a survival plan. Even adults don't realize this, but to run to the phone and to call 911 and then to see her there and to know that she's been shot and to of all this playing back, and the police actually coming to the house, and my first crime scene was at my house.
Now, quite often, Carol, when something like this occurs, we as human beings start thinking, what if I could have done something different? I can't imagine something like that happening to me. But do you often think, if the viewers were out there, what would you suggest if you could replay that whole scene? What would you do different with what you know now?
Okay. Well, actually, when you talk about domestic violence, you talk about the cycle and all of the literature, all of the research that has been written. I could have wrote it because I lived it, but at that time, domestic violence wasn't even identified as domestic violence.
That's right.
So, and it wasn't talked about as domestic violence. So in every household I went, whether it was mine, my aunts, or my uncles, men were beating their women. So it wasn't as if this was only happening in my house.
So this was a learned behavior that you saw growing up, and so on some level it appears as if this is normal, this is what families do.
But Melvina, what I'm listening to Carol telling us is, at that time, what we define as domestic violence today was condoned when a man was beating a woman. Is that what I hear you saying?
Well, and there are still laws on the books, that identifies a woman as a man's property. That was written way back when.
So I would go to the police department if I was a woman and share with them that my husband had beat me, my eye would be black, all the physical evidence would be there. What would normally happen?
At that point in time?
Yes.
Well, it depends on the magnitude of her injuries, I guess, at that time.
Okay.
But you talk about showing up, there are no physical signs, or even if there is a scuffle or disarray, the law now says that the police shall, and before the law did not say that. And this has been 33 years since my mother's life was taken.
Wow.
So there has been a lot of legislative changes during that time since then, due to the significant loss of life of women in domestic violence.
Carol, you've got to define to me now, to define for me, what is domestic violence?
Well, domestic violence...
And for the audience, and if you can look into the camera.
Okay. Well, domestic violence is, you identify the relationships. There's in family relationships. It could be a mother and a child. It could be a mother and her significant other, whether it's husband or boyfriend, whether there are children involved in that, or whether they're married or not. But it's the physical, not just physical, but psychological, emotional battering, just another person trying to have control over the others, their every move, because we have a lot of, when you talk about domestic violence, people are looking for physical signs, and it's not just about physical signs, it's about that verbal abuse, it's about psychological abuse.
And I was going to ask you if you can identify, because you earlier mentioned that there's a wheel, or the wheel or the cycle of domestic violence, and so there's many different ways that it can take place. And
Yes.
so one of the ways you're saying physical, psychological, what some of the
Emotional, financial, economical, because most of the time the other person will control the finances and will limit the resources. So that's why a lot of women stay, because they don't have the financial resources to be able to get out of a relationship because of everything that's controlled by the other party.
And before you ask, so what would you say to a woman? And we know now statistically now men have been being battered.
Right.
They're reporting it more.
Yes.
So what would you say to a person who is currently in a domestic
Well,
violence situation and
Professor Goodman, though, I'm still having a hard time understanding what domestic violence is. And I want to make sure our viewers understand too.
Okay, that's
because
fair.
I thought it was just a woman or a man being beaten up. And what I'm hearing Carol telling me is a lot larger than that. Some women are being abused and won't even acknowledge it.
Right. And not just acknowledge it. You have to look at self-esteem. If you're being verbally abused and you've been told that you're nothing, you won't amount to nothing, nobody wants you, you're dirt, you're not worth anything. And after months and years of hearing that, people begin to believe that. So therefore, they're not operating as an individual, like a clear-minded individual of us. And you have to think about the isolation. The isolation helps the containment of control. Because
You're saying that the abuser would actually isolate the one that's being abused?
yes, from their family members or from anyone outside of their control. Because if I'm the one feeding you all of your information, you're going to hear what I say. If there's no one else to interject that this is not correct, then you're going to.
Hang on for 1 second. We got a caller. Seeds of Wealth and Wellness.
Yes, good evening. How y'all doing?
Wonderful, wonderful. Who am I speaking to?
My name is Deborah.
Yes, ma'am. And what is your question, caller?
In your opinion, the lady in the middle, especially, how do you think the practice of domestic violence got started? Because it's so wide, it's worldwide. And I was wondering, in your opinion, how you think this practice got started.
All right.
I'll get off the phone and let you answer, okay?
Caller, thank you for calling in. And for those that are interested in calling, the number is 804-915-5202. Well, Carol, you have a question. How did the practice of domestic violence start?
Well, domestic violence started early in the history of mankind. The first homicide in humankind was Abel and Cain. So domestic violence is not just about a spouse, male and a female. It could be about the children. It could be about anyone. It's family violence. So it's not just about the two people in the relationship. So that's when it started. And as far as the male versus female, it's like I talked about the law as a woman being the male's property. And you have to look at back in history, men had farms, they had animals, and when things disobeyed, then the practices back then was to hit or to strike. So domestic violence is learned behavior.
Exactly.
And that's what we have to understand. It is learned behavior, and when even something as simple as if you tell your child if somebody hit you, you hit them back. So that's you encouraging your child to create an act of violence or a batter, because assault, you talk about batter and assault, two pieces go together, but you don't have to do them both at the same time. So we have to be aware of what our practices are and our behaviors, because violence is violence, and most of the time violence is learned in the household, and that's how it spills into the street.
Wow. We talked about domestic violence, and again, callers, if you have a question, Carol Adams is here, and eventually it would be the Carol Adams Foundation. And the number here is 804-915-5202. Professor Goodman and Carol Adams, I'm involved in a domestic violence relationship. I want to get out. What do I do?
Okay. Well, you can call the police department. or there are a lot of resources that are available. There's a great group called 211 where you can look them up online, or you can call them, and they have a host of numbers for domestic violence shelters, domestic violence programs that will help you start with your planning. And that's the key, is to having a good plan. But if you're ready to go, you need to call someone that can help you move right away, because saying that you're ready to go means that you're filled up, that you don't want to take anymore. And it takes a lot for a woman to get that point, because I begged my mother to leave and she would not leave. So it takes a lot for a woman to get to that point, to say that they're going to leave, because you have to understand what that means. That means uprooting your children and yourself from your life as that you know it is right now, and going to the unknown. Whether you're going to have to go to a shelter and share residence with someone else, how you're going to make it. And then when you decide to leave, that escalates things. So that puts the perpetrator, a woman is 5 times more likely to be killed when she decides to leave.
Wow.
So it's important that you reach out to the police, someone who can help you move right away and help you be safe.
And today, thankfully, we definitely have much more resources available to help people in those situations to get to a safe place. I wanted to ask you if you could share with the viewers, what I'm impressed with is your life was affected by that in a major way. And you didn't allow that to define you to the point that it crippled you, but you took that situation and now you are on the forefront of initiatives as it relates to domestic violence. And you have quite a few things out there in different organizations and individuals kind of providing resources to help people. Can you tell the audience about that?
Are there some events coming up, Carol?
Yes. Well, on September the 21st, I have a domestic violence gala, and this is the 2nd year, and it's titled Walk a Mile in My Shoes, and that's what the Carol Adams Foundation is all about, because I want to remind people, or to make people think about a child living in a household of domestic violence, how it is to hear fighting on the other side of the door, and you run into the aid of your parent and you can't get there, and how it is not to be able to concentrate in school during the day because you've been up to fighting all night long. But
how would they get in touch with somebody, or how would they get more information on that gala that's taking? Is there a phone number?
Yes, 804-646-4069, or you can log on to eventbrite.com and put in Walk a Mile in My Shoes, and all of the events will come up.
Okay, say that one more time.
Eventbrite.com.
Eventbrite. That's EVENTBRITE.com. Oh, okay.
And it will have all of the events listed, and also have on October the 5th a walk, and this walk titled Walk a Mile in My Shoes is absolutely free, but we want to bring people together to talk about domestic violence, because domestic violence is an epidemic that we don't talk about, and because we don't talk about it, it doesn't take money to stop domestic violence. It takes communication, it takes education, and that's about us talking to people at all levels and all ages to tell them that about domestic violence, because it affects everyone. And people won't get involved because they think that it's not happening to them now, or someone that they know now, that is not their business. But eventually, it will.
Now,
And we have to understand too that although there are lots of resources out there, domestic violence happens at a very alarming rate, even with we have so much more available to us today, and it probably has increased because more people are reporting, whereas back then, when you're talking about the 60s and before the 70s, 80s, there wasn't much legislation. But still, and young girls are they are in domestic violence situations at very early age, early teens, being battered, by boyfriends or girlfriends, whatever their sexual preference might be.
Now we want to, again, our number is 804-915-5202. That's 804-915-5202. Now, Carol, you have met some incredible people throughout your activism, I have to say. but with the Carol Adams Foundation. Now, there's a book up here that is titled by Delton Adams,
Yes.
and the title of that book is
Cleaning out the family's closet.
Yes.
Cleaning Out